Tonight, as you settle in and prepare to rest, allow yourself to drift slowly into the world of ancient stories. This is not a hurried journey. It is a gentle unfolding of old words, old songs, and old beliefs, carefully carried through time like embers glowing quietly in the dark. As you listen, there is no need to hold on to every detail, no need to keep your thoughts alert and sharp. Instead, you may let the rhythm of the story flow past you, like water over smooth stones, knowing that these words will guide you into sleep as much as they guide you through myth. The story you are about to hear is one of the oldest and most haunting tales from the North, a tale that begins with silence, passes through the creation of gods and giants, and leads eventually to the world's fiery ending and its quiet rebirth. It is the story of Ragnarok, a tale of prophecy, of fate, of endings that are also beginnings. But before we reach that final storm of fire and ice, we must walk calmly through the world that came before it. The vast emptiness, the shaping of the earth, the rise of the gods, and the bonds of family, loyalty, and betrayal that will one day unravel. This story comes from the myths of the Norse people, who lived long ago in the cold northern lands of Europe, lands of deep forests, endless seas, and long winters when the sun seemed to vanish. On those dark nights, people told stories around the fire, stories that explained the world they lived in, stories that gave meaning to the stars, the seasons, and the struggles of life. Their myths were not merely entertainment. They were a way of weaving human lives into the larger pattern of the cosmos. And so, as you rest here, you are joining a tradition that stretches back centuries. Imagine yourself seated in a quiet hall, the fire burning low, the air cool, the shadows soft against wooden beams. A voice begins to tell of the gods, and though you know you may not stay awake to hear every word, you know also that this is a story that has been told countless times before and will be told again. What makes this story particularly powerful is its honesty about the world. Unlike some myths, which imagine a perfect paradise or a world that lasts forever, the Norse myths accepted that all things must come to an end. Even the gods themselves were not spared from destiny. They too would face their final battle, and they too would fall. And yet, within this ending, the Norse also believed in renewal, in a new dawn after the long night, in the green earth rising again after fire and ruin. This balance, between destruction and renewal, between chaos and order, between despair and hope, gives the story of Ragnarok its dreamlike power. It is not a tale meant to frighten, but rather to remind us that change is natural, that even endings are part of the larger cycle of existence. Just as the day fades into night, and night fades once more into day, so too do worlds pass away, only to be reborn. As you listen, allow these ideas to settle gently within you. You do not need to hold on to the details. You do not need to follow every name or every place. The story itself will carry you like a calm current. Some parts may stay with you. Others may fade as you drift toward sleep. That is perfectly as it should be. Tonight, we will begin in the very beginning, before there was earth or sky or sea, before there were gods or men, before light or warmth. There was only the great emptiness. The Norse called it Ginnungagap, the yawning void. From this silence, from this endless stillness, came the spark of creation. From fire and ice, from chaos and order, the world was born. And so, as you let your breathing slow and your body grow heavy, you may imagine this emptiness, the wide, quiet gap before time itself. A place of silence, a place without urgency, a place where there is no need to hold on to thought. Only space, only stillness, only the beginning of the story. We will travel from this vast emptiness into the shaping of worlds, through the lives of gods, through laughter and sorrow, through battles and betrayals, and finally to the last great day, when the gods themselves march out to face their fate. But for now, all you need to do is rest and let the story begin. Long before there were stars in the sky, long before there were oceans or forests, there was only silence. Imagine yourself drifting in that silence now, a silence so deep that it seems to stretch forever. The Norse poets called it Ginnungagap, the yawning gap, the great emptiness at the beginning of all things. It was not like the night sky, filled with stars and shifting clouds. It was not even like the darkness behind closed eyes. Ginnungagap was something deeper, a void without shape or sound, without past or future. It was pure potential, waiting quietly for something to begin. In this great gap, two realms pressed against its edges, as though breathing gently into the emptiness. To the north lay Niflheim, a realm of endless frost and mist. There, icy rivers wound their way outward, heavy with cold, and glaciers stretched into the distance. To the south burned Muspelheim, a realm of fire and flame, home to heat that never faded, sparks that leapt endlessly into the void. Between them stretched Ginnungagap, silent and waiting, suspended between frost and flame. It is here, in this tension, that the story begins. For a long while, nothing stirred. The ice of Niflheim hung heavy and still, while the flames of Muspelheim flickered and danced. Slowly, over timeless ages, the frost crept outward into the gap, and the fire leapt outward to meet it. When the two touched, cold and heat, silence and spark, something wondrous happened. The ice began to melt, and from the drops of water came the stirrings of life. Out of that melting frost, out of the meeting of extremes, there formed a great giant. Ymir, the first being, vast and heavy, his breath like thunder. And with Ymir came more. From the melting ice emerged a cow, Audhumla, whose milk nourished the new giant, and whose gentle presence would nurture creation itself. But Ymir's story is yet to come. For now, let us linger here, in Ginnungagap, where the first drops fell, where the silence was broken only by the slow sound of water melting and dripping into emptiness. Imagine the stillness of that place, broken only by the crackle of distant fire and the faint hiss of ice softening into water. Imagine how vast it must have seemed, a gap wider than thought, where each spark from Muspelheim floated like a star, and each drop from Niflheim echoed like rain. In that vastness, there was no rush, no urgency. Time itself had not yet begun. The world was in no hurry to arrive. The poets who told this story often spoke in images that seemed dreamlike, of rivers that flowed before there was land, of frost that bit before there was air to carry its chill. These were not facts in the way we think of them now, but visions, glimpses of mystery shaped into words. For the Norse, Ginnungagap was more than an empty space. It was the womb of all creation, the in-breath before the first song was sung. And so, as you rest and listen, you may picture yourself floating gently within that vast gap. On one side, you see the faint glow of fire, warm and restless, glowing like coals in a hearth. On the other, you see the shimmer of ice, cold and still, gleaming like glass beneath moonlight. Between them, nothing, and yet, in that nothing, the promise of everything to come. The meeting of fire and ice was no sudden clash. It was a slow unfolding, the kind of meeting that takes ages upon ages, like mountains wearing away beneath the wind, or rivers carving valleys over endless years. From the frost, thick and heavy, came rime and snow. From the fire came sparks and heat. And in the middle, in the heart of Ginnungagap, the frost softened and dripped. Drop by drop, the gap became alive with sound. That slow rhythm, the quiet dripping, is how the story of the cosmos began. Not with a shout, not with a sudden explosion, but with a gentle meeting of two forces, opposites that, together, gave birth to something new. There is a calmness in this beginning, a reminder that not all great changes come with noise and fire. Some begin softly, quietly, with patience. Over time, those drops of water formed shapes. They clung together, gathering mass, and from them Ymir emerged, the first living being. But even before Ymir opened his eyes, the cow Audhumla appeared, born from the same melting frost. Her coat was white like snow, and she carried within her the nourishment needed to sustain life. She would feed Ymir with her milk, just as later she would uncover more from the ice, the ancestors of the gods themselves. But before we rush forward, let us pause once more in the gap itself. Ginnungagap is not only the birthplace of giants and gods, it is also a symbol of waiting, of stillness before creation. When the Norse imagined this void, they may have thought of the winters they knew so well, long months of darkness and snow, when the world seemed frozen, when nothing grew. And yet, from that waiting, spring would always return. In the same way, From Ginnungagap came the first stirrings of life. As you listen now, let that image of the void become a place of rest for you. Picture the gap, wide and endless, yet not frightening. A vast openness, calm and still, where there is no need to move quickly, no need to worry about what comes next. The fire and the ice are there, but they are patient. They wait. As you wait, letting time unfold in its own way. In this way, Ginnungagap is not only a story of the beginning of the world, but also a reminder of the value of quiet, of stillness, of allowing things to come together at their own pace. Just as you cannot force sleep, you cannot force creation. It arrives when it is ready, slowly, gently, naturally. And so, from the silence of Ginnungagap, from the meeting of fire and frost, the story of everything began. Soon, giants will walk, gods will rise, and worlds will take shape. But for now, in this chapter, all is calm. The fire glows, the ice shimmers, and in between, the first drops of life fall softly into the waiting void. From the stillness of Ginnungagap, where fire and frost met in patient silence, there emerged the first living shapes. Out of the melting ice, slow and heavy, came Ymir, the great primordial giant. He was not born in the way mortals are born, nor shaped as gods would later be shaped. He was vast, enormous beyond imagining, a being of raw strength and chaotic form, as if the frost and fire had created not order but sheer, untamed power. His breath was thick like mist, and his body was heavy as mountains. Ymir, the first of the frost giants, stirred in the emptiness, and with him, life itself had begun. Yet Ymir was not alone for long. From the same melting ice came a creature altogether different, gentle, calm, nurturing. This was the cosmic cow, Audhumla. Her coat was bright and white as freshly fallen snow, gleaming softly in the dim light of the gap. She was not a beast of chaos like Ymir, but a creature of nourishment, of patience, of quiet strength. While Ymir represented the rough force of creation, Audhumla carried with her the ability to sustain and to nurture what had been formed. Audhumla fed Ymir with her milk, for rivers of it flowing endlessly from her udders, and Ymir drank deeply, his great body sustained by her endless nourishment. From this strange and tender bond, life continued. As Ymir rested and grew, new beings began to form from him. From his sweat, under his great arms, two more giants emerged, male and female. From his legs, joined together, another being was born, monstrous and strong. And so, from Ymir's very body, the race of giants began, spilling forth into the growing world, beings of strength, wildness, and frost. But Audhumla, too, was shaping the future. She needed food herself, and so she turned to the salty ice that surrounded her. Day after day, she licked the frozen blocks, her tongue smoothing the frost, her patience slowly uncovering what was hidden within. On the first day, as she licked, strands of hair began to appear. On the second day, a head began to form beneath the ice. And on the third day, from the frost emerged a whole figure, Buri, tall, strong, and noble. He was unlike Ymir, for he carried not the chaotic force of giants, but a calmer, steadier essence. Buri would become the ancestor of the gods themselves, and from him the line of Odin would one day descend. Already, the pattern of the cosmos was taking shape. From Ymir came the giants, wild and mighty. From Audhumla's patient work came Buri, whose descendants would bring order and wisdom. In this way, chaos and order, destruction and creation were set upon the same stage, destined always to clash, destined always to weave the fabric of the myth. Let us pause for a moment to linger on these images. The great giant Ymir, heavy and immense, his breath echoing in the void, and the gentle cow Audhumla, her calm presence bringing nourishment to the first life. Picture her licking slowly at the frozen blocks, her patience uncovering the ancestor of gods. These are not simply fanciful pictures from long ago. They are symbols of how life itself unfolds. Chaos brings power, but nourishment brings growth. Wildness brings change, but patience uncovers hidden truth. The Norse poets who told these tales may have seen such truths in their own world. In the long winters, when food was scarce and storms howled outside, strength alone could not sustain a family. Nourishment, patience, and care were just as necessary as power. And in the spring, when the ice began to thaw, what had long been hidden could emerge, just as Buri had been uncovered from the frozen blocks by Odhumla's tongue. Meanwhile, Ymir's own body continued to generate life. The giants that came from him spread across the void, filling the emptiness with their presence. They were strong, unpredictable, often dangerous. Yet without them, the balance of the world could not exist. For in the Norse view of things, there was no creation without conflict, no order without chaos pressing against it. Ymir's children would one day stand against the children of Buri, and in their struggles, the shape of the world itself would be decided. Still, in this early time, all was new. Ymir drank deeply of Odhumla's milk, and Odhumla licked patiently at the ice, uncovering Buri, whose line would lead to Odin, Vili, and Vi, the gods who would one day challenge Ymir himself. The stage was quietly being set, though none could yet see how the story would unfold. If you listen closely, you may hear the rhythm of this myth echoing like a lullaby, the great breath of Ymir, steady and slow, the gentle licking of Odhumla, persistent and patient, the drip of water still melting in Ginnungagap. These sounds form the heartbeat of creation, calm and unhurried. In the stillness of your own rest, you can let those images wash over you, soothing and quiet, knowing that creation is never rushed, never forced, but always unfolding in its own way. In the end, Ymir and Odhumla represent two sides of the beginning. One, the raw, untamed force of life, wild and fertile but chaotic. The other, the steady hand of nourishment, uncovering what is hidden, bringing forth wisdom from patience. Both were needed. Both belonged to the story. From them, and through them, came the first giants, the first gods, and the first division between order and chaos, a division that would one day bring the world to its fiery end at Ragnarok. But that ending is far ahead. For now, the world is only beginning to stir. The giant breathes, the cow feeds, the ice melts, and from the frost, the first ancestor of gods stands revealed. All is slow, all is calm, and the story, like the listener, has only just begun to wake. From the frost uncovered by Odhumla's steady tongue, the figure of Buri had emerged, tall, strong, and silent. He was the first of the gods, the ancestor from whom a new line would flow. In time, Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor took for himself a wife, Bestla, who was of the race of giants, descended from Ymir himself. From this union of god and giantess, 3 sons were born, Odin, Vili, and Vi. These brothers were unlike Ymir, and unlike the giants who had spilled from his form. They carried within them the essence of something different, something that leaned not only toward strength, but also toward thought, vision, and the shaping of order. Odin was the eldest, the most restless, filled with an endless desire for knowledge. His eyes searched always for what lay beyond, for what was hidden, for what could be learned and understood. Vili, his brother, carried the gift of will, of determination, of clarity that could cut through uncertainty. And Vi, the third, carried the gift of sacredness, of spirit, of those things unseen but deeply felt. Together, they represented mind, will, and spirit, the 3 forces that would soon change the course of the cosmos. For as these brothers grew, so too did Ymir, the great giant, and the countless beings who had spilled from his body. The void was filling with life, but it was not yet shaped. There were rivers, yes, and frost and flame, but there was no true land, no sky, no ordered world. Ymir's children were strong, but their strength was chaotic. They fought and multiplied without purpose, threatening to overwhelm the balance of creation. The 3 brothers saw this and understood that if the world was to become more than endless chaos, something had to be done. And so, they turned their eyes to Ymir himself, the vast giant whose very body was the source of all the frost giants. It was a heavy choice, for Ymir was their elder in a way, a being born from the first joining of fire and ice. Yet the brothers knew that the world could not take form so long as Ymir's presence filled it. And so, together, they rose against him. The story says they slew him, the first act of divine order against primal chaos. Ymir fell, and as he fell, his blood poured out in a great flood, drowning many of his own children. The giants who survived fled to the far reaches of the void, to live in Jotunheim, a land that would forever stand apart from the realm of the gods. But from Ymir's death, creation truly began. The brothers took his enormous body and began to shape the world from it. From his flesh, they formed the earth itself, wide and solid. From his bones, they built the mountains, sharp and jagged. His blood became the seas, rivers, and lakes flowing across the land. His skull they lifted high, creating the vault of the sky, and from beneath it they set 4 dwarves at the corners, Nori, Suri, Ostri, and Vestri, to hold it steady, marking north, south, east, and west. From Ymir's hair, the forest grew, soft and swaying in the wind. His teeth and broken bones became stones, scattered across the earth. His brain they cast into the sky, where it became clouds, drifting slowly in the heavens. Even the sparks of Muspelheim, which had drifted into the void, were set into place by the brothers, fixed as stars to light the night sky. From the giant's mighty body, every corner of the world was shaped, and from his end came the ordered beauty of creation. It is a strange and powerful image, that the world we walk upon, the seas we sail, the mountains we climb, are all formed from the body of a slain giant. Yet for the Norse, this was not gruesome but natural. It was the way of things. From sacrifice comes life, from ending comes beginning. Just as the day ends for the night to arrive, just as the seed must break for the plant to grow, so too did Ymir's body give rise to the world itself. The 3 brothers looked upon their work and saw that it was good. The land was broad, the seas deep, the mountains high, and the sky wide above them. They had taken what was wild and unshaped and made from it something that could endure. And yet, there was still more to do. Around the earth, they built a great wall from Ymir's eyebrows, a protective barrier that would hold back the giants and their descendants. Within this wall lay the land of Midgard, the middle world, a place that would one day be home to humankind. It was a land safe from the frost giants, shaped carefully and kept apart from the chaos beyond. In these first acts, we see the roles of Odin, Vili, and Ve. Together they stood not as destroyers, but as shapers, as those who could take what was raw and untamed and mold it into something lasting. The story of their creation is not just about power, but about vision, the ability to see that from death comes life, from chaos comes order, and from sacrifice comes a world. As you listen, imagine that world forming slowly around you. The soft earth beneath your feet, the mountains rising in the distance, the rivers flowing quietly through valleys. Above, the sky arches wide, and the stars shimmer like sparks fixed in place. This is the world as Odin and his brothers shaped it, calm and strong, a place of balance between what was and what would come. The story tells us that in these early days, there was no sun to light the sky, no moon to mark the passage of time. Those would come later, shaped by the gods to bring order to day and night. For now, the world rested in its new form, fresh and wide, born from Ymir's body and held within the careful work of Odin, Vili, and Ve. And so, the first great act of the gods was not to build temples or to gather power for themselves. It was to create a world in which life could thrive, a world carved carefully from chaos, a world both fragile and enduring. It was a beginning that carried within it the seeds of all that was to follow, of struggle, of beauty, of sorrow, and of hope. Tonight, as you let this story guide you toward rest, you may picture yourself walking slowly across that first world. The ground is solid, the rivers clear, the sky wide and calm. The mountains rise quietly in the distance, and the stars glow gently above. The work of the 3 brothers is complete, and from their effort, a place has been made for life to begin. The world that Odin and his brothers shaped from Ymir's body was vast and beautiful, but it was not a single, simple realm. The Norse did not imagine the cosmos as one world alone, but as many worlds, each with its own place and purpose. Together they formed a great pattern, connected and sustained by Yggdrasil, the world tree, a mighty ash tree whose roots and branches reached into every corner of existence. Yggdrasil was not like any tree known to mortals. Its branches spread farther than sight could follow, arching high above the sky and stretching out across the void. Its roots dug deeper than imagination could reach, drinking from hidden wells of wisdom and destiny. Upon its trunk, countless creatures moved, the eagle in its crown, the squirrel Ratatoskr scurrying between root and branch, and the dragon Nidhogg gnawing at its roots below. It was not only a tree but the very framework of the universe, the structure upon which all the 9 worlds were held. Let us wander slowly through these 9 worlds, not in haste, but gently, as if walking a dream. First there was Asgard, the shining realm of the gods, high above, where Odin ruled from his great hall, Valhalla, and where the Aesir gathered in their stronghold. Its halls were bright, its walls strong, its air filled with the songs of warriors and the wisdom of gods. It was a place of power, of thought, and of fate, yet also of beauty, golden fields, radiant halls, and rivers flowing like silver. Beneath it lay Midgard, the middle world, built from Ymir's eyebrows, where men and women would one day dwell. Midgard was surrounded by oceans so wide that only the serpent Jormungandr, cast into the deep, could encircle it. This was the world of humanity, fragile and small compared to Asgard, yet guarded, protected, and given its own place within the cosmic order. Far to the east was Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. Rugged and wild, filled with mountains and forests untamed, it was the home of Ymir's children, who had survived the flood of his blood. They remained ever opposed to the gods, not merely out of malice, but because they represented the untamed forces of nature, storm, fire, darkness, and wildness. Here, the giants plotted and tested the gods, forever challenging the order Odin and his brothers had built. To the south burned Muspelheim, the realm of fire, where Surtur and his kin dwelt, guardians of flame. It was a place of endless heat, of molten rivers and fiery skies, its sparks once carried into the void to become the stars. In Muspelheim burned the fire that would one day set the world aflame at Ragnarok, a destiny waiting quietly in the distance. To the north lay Niflheim, opposite Muspelheim, a land of mist and ice, cold and still. From its frozen rivers had come the frost that gave birth to Ymir, and within it lay the well Hvergelmir, from which countless rivers flowed. Deep within, Nidhogg the dragon gnawed at Yggdrasil's root, his breath cold, his hunger endless. Niflheim was a place of beginnings and endings, of silence and frost, a reminder of the chill that underlies all things. Beneath the earth, far from the sun, stretched Svartalfheim, the world of the dwarves. Here, in caverns and forges, the dwarves worked their craft, shaping wonders of gold and iron. From their hammers came treasures unmatched: Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, Freyr's golden boar, and ships and rings of great magic. Though hidden from the light of the sky, Svartalfheim was alive with fire and skill, its dark halls echoing with the ring of tools and the glow of molten metal. Near it was Alfheim, the realm of the light elves. Gentle and fair, brighter than the dawn, the elves dwelt in meadows and forests of light. They were beings of beauty and grace, guardians of natural forces, linked with growth and fertility. The Norse saw them as shining presences, almost dreamlike, halfway between gods and men, their laughter carried on the breeze, their footsteps soft upon the grass. Then there was Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir, gods of fertility, prosperity, and the natural world. While the Aesir of Asgard ruled with might and order, the Vanir ruled with wisdom of the earth, of cycles, of growth. From Vanaheim came Njord, god of the sea, and his children Freyr and Freya, whose beauty and power would join the Aesir after war and reconciliation. Vanaheim was fertile, green, and rich, a realm of deep harmony with the rhythms of life. Finally, there was Helheim, ruled by Hel, the daughter of Loki. It was not a place of torment, but a shadowy realm for those who had died without glory in battle. Its halls were cold, its fields gray, its rivers slow, and though it was not cruel, it was heavy with stillness. Here, souls dwelt in quiet, away from the feasts of Valhalla, resting in the dim light beneath the roots of Yggdrasil. 9 worlds in all, bound together by the roots and branches of the great tree. Yggdrasil connected them, nourished them, and held them in balance. At its roots, 3 wells fed its life. At Urd's well, the Norns, the weavers of fate, carved runes and watered the tree, ensuring its growth. At Mimir's well lay wisdom, where Odin himself would one day sacrifice an eye for knowledge. At Hvergelmir in Niflheim, countless rivers began, feeding the world with their endless flow. And though Yggdrasil was mighty, it was not free from danger. The dragon gnawed below, the eagle stretched its wings above, and the squirrel scurried between, carrying words of malice from root to branch. Yet still the tree stood, still it held, its branches green, its roots deep, its trunk strong. It was the very center of all things, a symbol of endurance, of balance, of life itself. As you picture these worlds, imagine yourself walking slowly along the roots of Yggdrasil, wandering gently from realm to realm. Each is unique, each has its place, and together they weave the fabric of existence. High halls, deep caves, icy rivers, fiery plains, shining fields, and shadowy halls, all bound together by the tree, all part of the same great pattern. The Norse imagined themselves living not in isolation but as part of this vast design, their lives woven into the fate spun by the Norns, their world but one among nine. To know the nine worlds was to know that life was wide and mysterious, full of realms beyond sight, each with its own role, its own balance, its own destiny. And so, the nine worlds stood, held by Yggdrasil's branches, fed by its roots, sheltered in its shade. From these worlds, the stories would unfold, stories of gods and giants, of elves and dwarves, of men and monsters, of fire and ice. Together they formed the stage upon which Ragnarok would one day arrive. But for now, they were simply there, strong, steady, eternal, like the slow breathing of the world itself. In the high halls of Asgard, among the shining walls and golden fields, there ruled the All-Father, Odin. His presence was not of simple strength or beauty, but of depth, of thought, of wisdom, and of restless seeking. Odin was the chief of the Aesir, the one who sat upon the high seat Hlidskjalf, from which he could gaze out across all nine worlds. Yet even from such a throne, he was never content to simply watch. Odin was always in search, always questioning, always reaching for the hidden knowledge that lay just beyond the edge of sight. Odin was not like other gods who were satisfied with their power. For him, wisdom was greater than gold, greater than glory, greater even than life itself. He was willing to pay any price for it. And in the long telling of the myths, again and again, he sacrificed an eye, his peace, his comfort, even his safety, to gain what others could not. He was the god of kings and rulers, yes, but also the god of poets, wanderers, and those who sought meaning in the mysteries of existence. His hall was Valhalla, a place of vast size and shining roof, where the warriors chosen by Odin's Valkyries feasted after death. In that great hall, endless mead was poured, endless boar was roasted, and endless songs were sung. Yet Odin himself did not always remain within its brightness. He wandered, cloaked and hooded, across the worlds, sometimes as a noble king, sometimes as a bent old traveler, one eye dark and hidden beneath a broad-brimmed hat. The missing eye was no accident, but the mark of his deepest sacrifice. In his endless pursuit of wisdom, Odin traveled to the well of Mimir, where the waters shimmered with memory and foresight. To drink from that well was to see more than any mortal could bear, to carry knowledge of what had been and what was to come. But the well did not give freely. Mimir demanded a price, one of Odin's eyes. Without hesitation, Odin plucked it from his own face and left it in the well, a pale orb beneath the water, gazing forever upward. In return, Odin drank, and the wisdom entered him, settling like fire and ice within his soul. From that moment, Odin saw differently. Though he had lost half his vision, he had gained the weight of knowing. He understood the fragility of the worlds, the inevitability of Ragnarok, and the threads of fate that bound gods and men alike. It did not make him calmer. If anything, it made him more restless, more determined to prepare for what must one day come. Yet Odin was not only a seeker of wisdom, he was also a god of magic and poetry. From the giants he stole the mead of poetry, a drink that granted inspiration, giving poets their gift of verse. From the runes, he drew power, hanging himself upon Yggdrasil for 9 long nights, pierced by his own spear, denying himself food and water, until the secrets of the runes revealed themselves. This sacrifice, a mirror of death, gave him mastery over words, symbols, and spells. With them he bound the dead, healed the sick, and whispered secrets that could change the tide of war. Despite his wisdom and power, Odin was not always gentle. He was a god of war as much as of poetry. His chosen warriors, the Einherjar, fought and trained daily in Valhalla, preparing for the final battle of Ragnarok. He did not weep for those slain in battle, but rather welcomed them with pride, knowing that their strength would be needed when the end came. To Odin, every battle was part of a greater preparation, every death another step toward the last day. Odin's family was vast, his children many. By different mothers, he fathered gods of strength, beauty, and fate. His most famous son was Thor, the Thunderer, strong and fearless. But Odin also fathered Balder, the Shining One, gentle and beloved, and Vidar, the silent god of vengeance. Through these children, Odin's fate was intertwined with every corner of the Norse world, with storms, with light, with silence, and with prophecy. Yet even as All-Father, Odin did not rule by force alone. He sought alliances and bargains, sometimes with giants, sometimes with other gods. He wove together pacts, traded secrets, and played the long game of destiny. Where Thor might break down a door, Odin would slip through a crack in the wall, cloak drawn tight, voice soft, eyes always watching. The image of Odin that lingers is often one of paradox. He was both a ruler and a wanderer, both a warrior and a poet, both stern and subtle, both cruel and kind. He could bless with knowledge and curse with madness. He could whisper wisdom into the ear of a poet or strike terror into the heart of a king. He was never simple, never one thing. To the Norse, this made him both inspiring and unsettling. He was not a figure of perfect comfort but of deep complexity, a god whose wisdom was costly, whose knowledge carried the burden of doom. And yet, in him, they saw the reflection of their own world, a world that was beautiful yet harsh, wise yet fleeting, glorious yet bound for its own end. As you rest now, you might picture Odin wandering beneath the branches of Yggdrasil, staff in hand, cloak trailing behind him, one eye gleaming, the other lost to the waters of Mimir's well. He pauses at the edge of a firelit hall, listening to the songs of warriors. He leans over a sleeping poet, whispering a verse. He looks across the 9 worlds, ever searching, ever waiting. For Odin knew what few dared to admit, that even the gods themselves were not beyond fate. He knew that the day of Ragnarok was coming, when fire would rise, when giants would march, when the wolf would break its chains, and when even he, the All-Father, would fall. And still, he sought, still he prepared, still he guided his people, never ceasing, never resting. In this, Odin was the truest reflection of the Norse spirit, not eternal, not unbreakable, but determined, wise, and willing to face the inevitable with open eyes. And so, the story of Odin is not only the story of a god but the story of wisdom itself, costly, restless, burdened, and yet shining like a torch in the dark. If Odin was the wanderer and seeker of wisdom, then Thor, his son, was the hammer of Asgard, the protector, the guardian, the strength that stood between chaos and the world of gods and men. Thor was the thunderer, his voice like the rumble of storm clouds, his stride shaking the earth, his hammer Mjolnir flashing like lightning across the sky. And yet, though his power was vast, Thor was not a figure of cold majesty or distant mystery. He was closer to the people, a god who fought for them, who protected their farms, their fields, their homes. His might was not abstract but practical, the strength to keep giants at bay, to keep storms from destroying crops, to keep the fragile world of Midgard safe from harm. Thor was massive, red-bearded, with eyes like fire and arms like iron. He was not subtle, nor was he known for quiet thought. But in his simplicity there was comfort, in his bravery there was hope, and in his laughter there was life. Where Odin plotted in silence, Thor strode boldly, unafraid of what lay ahead. Always by his side was Mjolnir, the hammer forged by dwarves, short-handled yet mighty, a weapon that could crush mountains and shatter armies. With it, Thor slew giants, defeated monsters, and defended the order of the gods. It was more than a weapon. It was a symbol, consecrating marriages, blessing births, and warding off evil. The hammer was sacred, as much a tool of life as of war. When Thor traveled, he rode in a chariot drawn by two great goats, Tangrasnir and Tangjoster. Their hooves struck sparks from stone, their breath steamed like clouds, and when slain they could be eaten and then reborn the next day, provided their bones were not broken. With these companions, Thor's journeys thundered across sky and land, noisy, bright, and full of force. The giants feared him, and for good reason. Again and again, Thor clashed with them, in Jotunheim, in Midgard, sometimes even in Asgard itself. He was their enemy not because of cruelty, but because of what he represented. The giants were the untamed, the chaotic, the destructive, and Thor was their opposite, the one who held the line, the one who kept the worlds in balance. And yet, Thor was not without humor, nor without stories that revealed his more human side. He was often tricked, sometimes mocked, sometimes outwitted. There is the tale, told by poets, of how Thor lost his hammer to the giant Thrym. To recover it, he was forced into disguise, dressed as a bride, veiled and adorned, pretending to be Freya. The image of the mighty thunderer in a bridal gown brought laughter then and still brings laughter now. Yet in the end, when the hammer was placed in his lap during the marriage feast, Thor's disguise fell away, and with one mighty strike he reclaimed his power. Such tales remind us that Thor was not merely strength, but also warmth, also humor, also something close to the hearts of the people who prayed to him. He was not perfect, but he was steadfast. He was not subtle, but he was reliable. In the long, dark winters, when storms roared across the sea and frost crept into every corner, it was Thor's protection that gave comfort. His family, too, played a role in his story. He was married to Sif, a goddess of golden hair and fertility. Their children included Thrud and Modi, who carried on his strength, and Magni, who would survive Ragnarok to inherit his hammer. His household was one of vitality, of life continuing, of strength passed on. Thor's nature stood in contrast to Odin's. Where Odin sacrificed for wisdom, Thor fought with all his might. Where Odin sought secrets, Thor sought victory. Where Odin wove plans like threads of fate, Thor cut straight through with hammer and courage. Yet the two were bound together, father and son, wisdom and strength, wanderer and warrior, complementing one another in the great story of the gods. The people of the North called on Thor more often than Odin. For kings and poets, Odin was the god of choice, but for farmers, sailors, and families, it was Thor who mattered most. His hammer was marked on amulets, carved on stones, invoked in prayers. He was the shield against the giants, the breaker of storms, the one whose might was as steady as the beating of the heart. But even Thor, for all his strength, could not escape fate. It was foretold that at Ragnarok he would meet his greatest enemy, Jormungandr, the world serpent. The two had clashed before, in battles fierce and terrible, but on the final day their destinies would intertwine. Thor would slay the serpent with his hammer, yet after 9 steps he himself would fall, poisoned by its venom. Strength beyond measure, but still mortal in the face of destiny. This knowledge did not weaken Thor. Instead, it gave his courage even greater depth. For to fight knowing you cannot escape is the truest form of bravery. Thor's story, then, is not only one of thunder and battle, but of facing fate with unflinching will. As you rest, you may imagine Thor's presence, the rumble of his chariot in the distance, the flash of lightning across a dark sky, the deep laughter of a god who loves life even as he fights for it. Picture his hammer, heavy and strong, rising and falling, not only against enemies but also in blessing, in protection, in the promise that life endures. Thor is strength, yes, but he is also comfort. He is thunder, but he is also shelter. He is the storm, but he is also the stillness that follows, when the world feels safe again, when the crops can grow, when families can sleep in peace. And so, Thor the Thunderer takes his place beside Odin the All-Father, different yet united, wisdom and might, thought and action. Together, they shape the story of the gods, each essential, each bound by destiny, each beloved in their own way. If Odin was wisdom and Thor was strength, then Loki was something altogether different. He was neither steady nor reliable, neither protector nor ruler. Instead, he was the trickster, a figure of laughter and danger, of brilliance and betrayal, of fire and shifting shapes. Loki was a companion to the gods, a guest in Asgard's halls, yet never truly one of them. He moved between their company and that of the giants, belonging everywhere and nowhere, always a step aside from the paths others walked. Loki was handsome, quick-witted, and sharp-tongued. His cleverness was unmatched, his words flowing like water, smooth and fast. He could find a way out of the tightest snare, invent a solution to the most impossible problem. But just as often, he was the one who created the problem in the first place. This was Loki's way, to weave chaos into the order of the gods, sometimes as a test, sometimes as a jest, sometimes out of sheer restlessness. There are tales of his tricks that bring only laughter. Once, when Sif, Thor's wife, boasted of her shining golden hair, Loki crept upon her while she slept and cut it all away. Thor's fury was swift and terrible, but Loki, ever the schemer, found a solution. He traveled to the dwarves and persuaded them to forge new hair for Sif, hair spun from gold, finer than silk, that grew upon her head as real as any natural strand. From the same forges came treasures beyond imagining: Odin's spear Gungnir, Freyr's golden boar, and most famously, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. So what began as mischief became marvel, and once again Loki's chaos gave rise to creation. But not all his tricks ended so well. For Loki was also the father of monsters. With the giantess Angrboda, he brought into the world 3 children who would shape the fate of the gods. The first was Fenrir, the great wolf, whose jaws would one day snap the bonds of the world. The second was Jormungandr, the vast serpent cast into the sea, destined to encircle Midgard and clash with Thor. The third was Hel, half living, half dead, who ruled over the shadowy realm of the departed. These children, born of Loki's union with chaos, could not be ignored. Odin himself ordered that each be cast into their fated place: Fenrir bound in chains, Jormungandr thrown into the ocean, Hel given dominion over the dead. And though Loki smiled, his smile was thin, for he knew that his children would not be so easily contained. Loki himself was not bound by one form or one role. He was a shapeshifter, becoming man or woman, horse or bird, fish or fly. In one tale, to aid the gods, he became a mare and lured away a giant stallion. From this strange act came Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, swiftest of all creatures. Loki could be both helper and deceiver, both savior and destroyer, weaving light and shadow with equal ease. The gods tolerated him because they needed him. His cleverness often solved the very disasters he caused. His quick mind found paths that brute force could not. He brought laughter to their feasts, surprise to their plans, and sometimes uncomfortable truth to their counsels. But beneath their tolerance lay unease, for Loki's loyalty was never certain. He was a friend, but never a safe one. This tension grew sharper in the tale of Balder, the shining god, beloved of all. When Balder began to dream of death, the gods feared for him. His mother, Frigg, traveled across the worlds, asking all things to swear never to harm her son. Stones, metals, fire, water, trees, beasts, all swore the oath. All, save one small plant, the mistletoe, deemed too young and harmless to matter. Loki discovered this, and with a cruel smile, he fashioned a dart from mistletoe. He placed it in the hands of Balder's blind brother, Hodr, guiding his aim. The dart flew, and Balder fell, struck down not by a mighty weapon but by a slender twig. In that moment, laughter faded, and Loki's role changed forever. What had once been mischief became betrayal. What had once been tolerated became unforgivable. The gods wept, the halls of Asgard grew heavy, and the seeds of Ragnarok were sown. For his crime, Loki was punished with cruelty fitting his deeds. He was seized, bound with chains made from the entrails of his own son, and a serpent was placed above him, dripping venom onto his face. His faithful wife, Sigyn, stayed by his side, holding a bowl to catch the poison, yet when she turned to empty it, drops fell and Loki writhed in agony, shaking the earth with his pain. There he would remain, bound and suffering, until the day when he would break free at Ragnarok and march against the gods he once feasted with. And yet, even knowing his fate, even knowing his treachery, The image of Loki lingers in both shadow and light. He is the spark that unsettles, the wit that unsettles, the change that stirs stillness. Without him, the myths would lack tension, the gods would lack challenge, the stories would lack their sharp edge. Loki is both the laughter at the feast and the silence after betrayal. He is both the friend who helps and the enemy who harms. He is contradiction itself. As you rest now, you may picture Loki not only as the betrayer but also as the sly figure with a twinkle in his eye, the shapeshifter slipping through shadows, the voice whispering cleverness where others see only walls. He is fire flickering in the hearth, warm one moment, dangerous the next. He is the fox slipping across snow, unseen until he wishes to be seen. The Norse did not make him simple, nor easy. They made him necessary. For without chaos, order cannot endure. Without trickery, strength cannot be tested. Without Loki, even Ragnarok would lose its shape, for it is he who will one day lead the enemies of Asgard, his laughter turning to fury, his fire consuming all. But that is for another night, another telling. For now, Loki lingers on the edge of the story, restless, clever, waiting, his chains rattling softly in the dark. Among all the gods of Asgard, none was more loved than Balder. His name meant brightness, and that brightness was not only of face and form, but of spirit. Balder shone with a light that was both gentle and pure, a radiance that brought peace to those around him. Where Odin was heavy with wisdom, and Thor thundered with might, Balder brought calm, joy, and hope. His presence was like a spring morning after a long winter, or the first warmth of sunlight on snow. The poets tell that Balder was fairer than any flower, his hair gleaming like the golden fields of summer, his voice soft and kind. The gods loved him, the goddesses cherished him. Even the earth itself seemed lighter where Balder walked. To mortals, he was a dream of all that was best in life: beauty, peace, compassion. And so, when he began to dream of death, fear fell across Asgard. Night after night, Balder's sleep was filled with visions of darkness, of falling, of wounds and sorrow. These dreams were unlike the fleeting shadows most forget upon waking. They lingered, heavy with warning, carrying the weight of prophecy. For in the world of the Norse, dreams were not idle fancies, but messages, glimpses of what must come. And so the gods gathered in worry, knowing that even the brightest life may one day be dimmed. Frigg, Balder's mother and Odin's wife, could not bear the thought of losing her son. She set out across the 9 worlds, pleading with every being, every element, every object, to swear an oath not to harm Balder. Stone swore, fire swore, water swore. Trees, metals, beasts, and diseases all gave their promise. The world itself seemed to bend to her will, and at last, Frigg returned to Asgard comforted, believing her son was now safe. The gods, reassured, began to make a game of Balder's invulnerability. They gathered in the great hall, laughing as they hurled spears, stones, and axes at him, watching each weapon turn aside harmlessly, each blow fall soft upon his skin. Balder stood smiling, radiant in their company, unmarked by harm. Their joy rang out like music, a celebration of life's beauty made untouchable. But in the shadows, Loki watched. He saw the laughter, the ease, the light that Balder carried. And where others felt joy, Loki felt unease, a restlessness like fire on dry grass. He slipped quietly to Frigg, disguising himself as an old woman, and asked her if truly all things had sworn never to harm Balder. Weary from her journey, comforted by the thought of her son's safety, Frigg confessed one small exception. There was a plant, the mistletoe, growing young and slender, so slight that she had not thought to ask it. Loki's smile curled like smoke. With careful hands, he plucked the mistletoe and shaped it into a dart, sharp enough to pierce though small enough to seem harmless. He returned to the hall where the gods still played their game, hurling weapons that bounced away with laughter. There, he found Hoder, Balder's blind brother, who sat apart, unable to join in. Loki spoke kindly, offering to guide Hoder's hand, to let him take part in the joy. Hoder agreed, innocent in trust, and placed the dart in his grip. Guided by Loki, Hoder cast the mistletoe. It flew true, striking Balder in the heart. And there, before the laughter of gods, Balder fell. His brightness dimmed, his body lifeless, the hull turned to silence. The shock was like a storm breaking over Asgard. The gods stood frozen, unable to believe what had happened. Frigg cried out, her grief echoing through the worlds. Odin bowed his head, knowing that what he had feared was now upon them. Thor clenched his hammer, but could not strike against fate. And Hodr, blind and innocent, wept when he learned what his hand had done. Balder was placed upon his great ship, Ringhorn, to be sent to the realm of Hel. The vessel was vast, the largest ever built, but so heavy with sorrow that even the gods could not move it to the sea. They called for a giantess, Hyrrokin, who came riding a wolf with serpents for reins. With a single push, she sent the ship sliding into the waves, fire consuming its deck, flames rising high as Balder's body was carried away. His wife, Nanna, overcome with grief, leapt into the fire, joining him in death. The ship burned, and the smoke rose to the heavens, carrying with it the last light of Balder. But not all hope was gone. Hermod, another of Odin's sons, rode Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse, down into Hel's shadowy realm. He begged Hel herself to release Balder, to let him return to the living. Hel listened, cold and calm, and gave her answer. Balder might return, she said, but only if every being in the world would weep for him. If even one refused, he must remain. The gods sent their messengers, and the world wept. Men and women wept, beasts and birds wept, stones and trees wept. All creation seemed to grieve the loss of Balder. But when they came to a giantess dwelling in a cave, some say it was Loki in disguise, she refused. Let Hel keep what she has, she said, her voice like ice. And so the bargain was broken. Balder would not return. In that refusal lay the shadow of fate. The gods knew now that their world was moving toward its end. For the death of Balder was the first true step on the road to Ragnarok. The brightest among them had fallen, not in battle, not in glory, but by trickery and betrayal. And no laughter, no feast, no vow could erase what had been done. As you rest, imagine Balder's presence not as gone, but as a light that lingers. His kindness, his brightness, his gentle spirit did not vanish but became part of the memory of the world. He is the dream you wake from smiling, the glow of dawn on a cold morning, the warmth that endures even when night is long. Balder's story is both sorrow and comfort. Sorrow, because even the most beloved can be lost. Comfort, because even in loss, his memory shines. The Norse knew that his light would return after Ragnarok, reborn in the new world. And so, even in grief, there was a quiet promise that brightness never dies forever, but only sleeps, waiting to rise again. After Balder's fall, the halls of Asgard were heavy with grief, but also with unease. The gods knew that Balder's death was not an isolated tragedy, but a signal, a sign that shadows were lengthening, that fate's hand was already moving. Among those shadows was a beast they had long feared, the great wolf Fenrir, child of Loki and the giantess Angrboda. Fenrir was no ordinary wolf. From the moment he was born, he grew larger and more powerful with each passing day. His eyes gleamed with a fire not of the wild, but of something older, darker. His jaws were vast enough to swallow a man whole, his breath heavy with the scent of destruction. The gods, wary of his parentage and his might, chose to keep him close in Asgard rather than let him roam free across the worlds. Perhaps, they thought, if raised among them, he would grow tame. And so the wolf was brought to the shining realm, where the gods themselves fed him, trained him, and watched him grow. At first, Fenrir was but a pup, strong but not yet feared. Only Tyr, the brave god of war and justice, dared approach him without hesitation. Tyr alone would place his hand in the wolf's mouth as a gesture of trust, feeding him, calming him, and winning his companionship. For the others, even their courage faltered when they looked into Fenrir's eyes and saw the storm that lay within. But Fenrir did not stop growing. His paws grew the size of shields, his shoulders like mountains, his teeth sharper than the finest blades. His hunger was vast, and his strength unmatched. The gods, who had once laughed at his youth, began to whisper among themselves. They remembered the prophecies that spoke of Loki's children, the serpent Jormungandr destined to coil about the world, Hel ruling over the dead, and Fenrir, who would one day break free and bring ruin upon them all. Fearful, The gods resolved that Fenrir must be bound before he grew too strong. Yet they could not kill him, for he had done no wrong. And so they devised a plan to bind him with chains, under the guise of testing his strength. The first chain they forged was mighty, wrought of iron and thick as the anchors of ships. They brought it before Fenrir, smiling as though it were a game. "See, great wolf," they said, "test your might against this chain, and let us see if you can break it." Fenrir, proud and eager to prove himself, allowed them to fasten the iron links around him. With a shake of his vast body, he snapped the chain as though it were twine. The gods exchanged uneasy glances, their fears deepening. So they forged a second chain, stronger than the first, layered with magic and hammered with runes. Again, they approached Fenrir with friendly words, daring him to test his power once more. The wolf agreed, letting them bind him, but with a roar and a surge of strength, he shattered this chain as well. The sound of its breaking echoed through the halls of Asgard, and the gods knew that ordinary strength could not hold him. At last, they turned to the dwarves, the greatest smiths in all the realms. The dwarves listened to their plight and agreed to craft a binding unlike any other. From 6 impossible things they wove their creation: the sound of a cat's footstep, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. From these, they fashioned a ribbon smooth and soft, gleaming like silk, yet stronger than any chain. Its name was Gleipnir. When the gods brought this ribbon to Fenrir, suspicion grew in his heart. It seemed too slight, too fragile, to be worthy of his strength. He narrowed his great eyes, sensing the trick. "I will not allow myself to be bound," he said, "unless one among you places a hand in my mouth as a pledge of good faith. For if this binding is made with deceit, I will have my price." The gods fell silent, each glancing at the other, unwilling to make such a sacrifice. Only Tyr stepped forward, calm and resolute. He knew what was to come, yet he placed his hand in Fenrir's jaws, meeting the wolf's gaze with steady eyes. Trust, after all, must be repaid, even in tragedy. So Fenrir allowed himself to be bound with Gleipnir. The ribbon wrapped about his paws, his legs, his body, soft as silk, light as air. He tested it, straining, but it held firm. He pulled harder, muscles surging, eyes blazing, but the ribbon only grew tighter. He howled, struggling with all his vast might, shaking the ground, splitting the air, yet still the binding held. Gleipnir was unbreakable. Realizing the truth, Fenrir snapped his jaws shut and tore off Tyr's hand. The god did not cry out, though the blood fell freely. He had known his sacrifice, and he bore it in silence. Fenrir raged, his howls echoing across the worlds, but the gods drove a sword between his jaws, forcing his mouth open wide. The blade wedged so deep that his howls became muffled, his tongue lashed raw. There he lay, bound and chained, his fury sealed, until the end of days. The gods departed, some relieved, others uneasy. For though Fenrir was bound, they knew he was not defeated. He would remain there, waiting, until the doom foretold came to pass. When the bonds of Gleipnir would at last shatter, when the sword would break, Fenrir would rise again, more terrible than ever, and in his jaws would lie the fate of Odin himself. As you drift deeper into rest, picture the silent plain where the wolf lies bound. The ribbon gleams faintly against his dark fur, impossibly delicate, yet impossibly strong. His chest rises and falls with each breath, the ground trembling softly beneath him. The wind carries his growl, distant, like thunder still beyond the horizon. There is peace, for now, but also a reminder. Some forces may be delayed, but never denied. This was the way of the Norse world, a balance of light and shadow, of laughter and grief, of safety held only for a while. The binding of Fenrir was not a victory, but a pause before the storm that would one day break with all its fury. The death of Baldur and the binding of Fenrir left Asgard quieter than before, but not in peace. It was a silence heavy with waiting, the way the air holds its breath before a storm. The gods returned to their halls, to feasts and to council, yet a shadow lingered over every gathering. They knew now that fate had been set in motion, and though they did not know the hour, they felt the threads of destiny tightening around them. For the Norse, the end of all things did not come in an instant. Ragnarok crept slowly, with warnings scattered like cracks in ice. The first signs were small, almost easy to dismiss. Winters a little longer, storms a little harsher, harvests less certain. Then came greater omens, strange happenings that spoke of a world fraying at its edges. It was said that the sun and moon, chased always by the great wolves Skoll and Hati, grew wearier in their flight. The gods had long watched those wolves, knowing that one day they would succeed. And in the fading light of certain dusks, it seemed the wolves were nearer, their breath steaming across the sky, their jaws snapping closer to the golden chariot of the sun. Shadows lengthened, nights grew colder, and many whispered that the day was coming when light itself would be swallowed. On Midgard, among men, the signs were just as grim. Kin began to turn against kin. Brothers fought brothers, fathers against sons. Families that had once stood together broke apart in anger and blood. The sagas speak of wars without cause, of battlefields filling not with heroes, but with neighbors and kin who no longer knew the bonds of loyalty. Where once there was honor, greed now grew. Where once there was trust, betrayal spread like frost over a river. This age of strife was called the Fimbulwinter. It was no ordinary winter, but 3 long winters that came without a summer between. Snow fell thick upon the land, winds howled endlessly, and frost crept even into the warmest halls. Crops failed, herds starved, and hunger drove men to desperate acts. Across Midgard, survival became harder with each day, and the old warmth of community gave way to suspicion, to isolation, to violence. In Jotunheim, the realm of giants, unrest grew as well. The great frost giants, ever watchful, saw the weakening of the gods' hold and prepared themselves for the battles to come. Their power swelled with the deepening cold, for frost and storm were their true domain. The rumble of their gathering was said to echo like distant thunder, rolling across the mountains, a sound that carried dread to all who heard it. Even the seas stirred with foreboding. Far beneath the waves, the serpent Jormungandr, child of Loki and brother of Fenrir, shifted in his coils. He had long encircled the world, biting his own tail, but now he stirred restlessly. The ocean heaved and churned with his movements, sending floods to wash upon the shores. Sailors whispered that they had seen his scales glimmering beneath the waves, vast and glistening like islands of their own. And in Hell's shadowed realm, the dead began to stir. Hell herself, silent and stern, looked upon her growing host, for each winter claimed more souls, and each war sent countless more to her halls. Her kingdom swelled with the restless, the weary, and the fallen, and though she spoke little, it was said that her gaze turned more often toward the world above, as though she knew her time would soon come. Through all these signs, the gods tried to hold their course. They still gathered in council, still rode across the skies, still upheld what peace they could. But there was less laughter in the golden halls of Asgard, less music, less mirth. Even the feast seemed muted, the mead less sweet. The memory of Baldur's brightness haunted them, a reminder of what had been lost and what must yet be faced. Odin, most of all, bore the burden of foresight. His one remaining eye looked into the world with keen wisdom, and his other, sacrificed for knowledge, had glimpsed what was to come. He knew the signs, he knew the prophecy, and though he still sought ways to delay or soften the end, he also knew that some things were unchangeable. The Norns had spun their threads long ago, and no god, not even the Allfather, could cut them. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine the world beneath a sky of cold stars, the wind sharp with the bite of endless winter. Fires burn low in mortal halls, where families huddle close, yet the warmth seems never enough. Wolves cry out in the forests, their voices carrying like omens across the frozen night. Rivers lie still beneath ice, and the earth itself feels tired, heavy, as though holding its breath. The Norse told these tales not only as warnings, but as reflections of life itself. Just as winters come after summers, so too must endings come after beginnings. And just as the cold seems endless while it lasts, yet spring returns, so too would something new rise after Ragnarok. The signs of the end were not only despair, but also preparation, for the world was never meant to remain unchanged. The unraveling of order, the slow breaking of bonds, the creeping of cold, these were the signs. Gentle at first, then louder, then undeniable. And in their quiet, heavy way, they told all who listened that the story of the gods, like the story of men, was moving toward its final chapter. For now, though, it was still only the beginning of the end. The wolves had not yet caught the sun. The serpent had not yet risen fully from the sea. Fenrir remained bound though restless. The storm was gathering, but it had not yet broken. There was still time, still a fragile calm, like the last soft light before nightfall. After Baldur's death, there was little doubt among the gods that Loki had played a hand, though the full truth was veiled in disguise and deceit. Yet for a time, he remained among them, speaking with sharp wit, feasting in their halls, and twisting words with that familiar sly charm. But though he wore the face of a companion, suspicion clung to him like smoke to fire. The bonds of trust, once stretched thin, now frayed beyond repair. The gods had always endured Loki's ways. His tricks, his shape-shifting, his clever tongue, they had brought trouble, yes, but also solutions. More than once, it was Loki's cunning that had saved them from peril, retrieving treasures, devising plans, or outwitting their foes. But those days were now only memories. With Baldur gone, with Hodor's hand unwittingly guided to murder, the gods saw that Loki was no longer a mischief maker within their circle. He was their enemy. Even so, Loki did not slink away quietly. Instead, he seemed to grow bolder. At feasts, where the gods gathered to drink mead and find some relief from sorrow, Loki's tongue turned sharper still. One tale tells of a great banquet where he rose and poured insults upon the assembled gods and goddesses. One by one, he named them, mocking their secrets, their shames, their flaws. To Odin, he spoke of bargains too costly. To Thor, of brute strength without thought. To Freya, he whispered accusations of vanity. None were spared, and the hall grew heavy with anger. The gods tolerated his words for a time, for in their hearts they still remembered that he had once been a companion. But patience has its limits. When his mockery turned cruel and unrelenting, they cast him out from their hall. No longer would Loki sit at their table, no longer would he be counted among them. He was in exile, his bond with the Aesir broken beyond repair. It was in exile that Loki turned fully to his other children, the brood he had fathered with the giantess Angerboda. Fenrir, already bound but destined to break free. Jormungandr, the serpent stirring in the deeps. And Hel, queen of the dead, seated in her cold and shadowed hall. Where once Loki had walked in Asgard, now he walked among these children of doom, and in their company, he seemed at last to find his place. Yet even then, the gods sought to bind him, just as they had bound Fenrir. They hunted him across the worlds, determined to end his treachery before the last days came. Loki, ever a shapeshifter, fled in many forms, as a fish darting through rivers, as a bird wheeling in the sky, as firelight flickering on the horizon. But the gods pursued him tirelessly, for they knew his freedom meant further ruin. At last, they caught him in the form of a salmon, leaping in a river. Strong hands seized him, and they dragged him out, thrashing and twisting, his cleverness at last outmatched by fate. They carried him to a cave, dark and silent, and there they prepared his punishment. The gods turned upon his own kin to bind him. They took his sons, Vali and Narfi, and in a cruel fate, transformed Vali into a wolf. In madness, the wolf tore apart his brother, and from Narfi's entrails the gods fashioned unbreakable cords. With these, they bound Loki to the stones of the cave, his limbs stretched tight, his body held fast. Above him, they hung a serpent, its fangs dripping venom. Drop by drop, the poison fell upon Loki's face, burning like fire. His wife, Sigyn, faithful despite all, stood beside him, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But when the bowl grew full, she had to turn away to empty it, and in those moments, the drops struck Loki's skin. His body writhed, his screams shook the earth, and the sagas say that these tremors were felt by men as earthquakes. Thus Loki lay bound, far from the halls of the gods, writhing in torment. Yet even this was not the end, for the prophecy was clear. He would not remain bound forever. When Ragnarok came, his chains would break, the serpent would rise, Fenrir would be freed, and Loki himself would lead the hosts of chaos against the gods who had once been his kin. As you rest, picture the cave in which he lies. It is silent save for the slow drip of venom, the patient sound of Seijen's bowl filling and emptying, the faint tremor of Loki's restrained fury. Outside, the world turns, seasons shift, and men live and die, but within, he waits. His eyes, filled with hatred and cunning, fixed not on the stone ceiling above him, but on the days to come, when his suffering will be repaid in full. The story of Loki's final betrayal is not told only as a tale of vengeance, but as a reminder of what lies in the hearts of men and gods alike. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. A friend, once turned, can wound more deeply than any foe. The Norse sagas understood that sometimes the greatest danger is not the enemy at the gate, but the companion at the hearth. And so Loki remained, caught between pain and patience, awaiting the day when bonds would fail, when the serpent would stir, when the world itself would be swept into fire and flood. His betrayal was complete, and his role in the story of the gods was no longer that of a trickster, but of their final doom. The sagas tell that before the final battle, before the clash of gods and giants, there would come a winter unlike any other. Not the ordinary chill of passing seasons, nor the deep cold that men endure with fire and fur, but a winter unbroken, relentless, and merciless. This was the Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter, and it would last 3 full years without summer between. Imagine it, snow falling without pause, blanketing the world in white until fields, forests, and mountains alike were buried. Rivers froze so deeply that no thaw could touch them, seas stiffened with ice, and the very air seemed sharper, as though the breath of frost itself lingered upon every breeze. The sun rose pale and weak, its warmth failing to reach the earth, while the moon glowed faintly but offered no comfort. Stars seemed colder in their light, distant and watchful, as if they too waited for what was to come. For men, the Fimbulwinter was a trial of survival. The stores they had gathered dwindled, hunted game grew scarce, and crops lay dead beneath the endless snow. Hunger gnawed at every hearth, and warmth grew harder to find. Families huddled close in long houses, fires burning night and day, yet the chill seemed never to lift. The sound of the wind became a constant companion, howling through the trees, rattling doors, sweeping over frozen seas. But the cold was not the only enemy. The sagas tell that in the heart of this endless winter, kin would turn against kin. Brothers would slay brothers, fathers would fight sons, and bonds of blood, once the strongest of all, would break like brittle ice. Trust vanished, and men, driven by hunger and despair, raised their blades not only against strangers, but against those they once called family. The world itself seemed to unravel, not only in frost and storm, but in the hearts of humankind. This collapse of order was as much a part of the prophecy as the snow itself. For Ragnarok was not merely the destruction of the gods, but of all bonds that held the world together. The long winter stripped away the comforts of life, leaving only raw survival, and in that struggle, the old ties of loyalty, honor, and kinship withered. The Norse saw in this a truth, that endings are not only of the body, but of the spirit. In Asgard, the gods watched as the Fimbulwinter spread. They saw Midgard faltering, its people fighting and dying, its warmth fading. They knew this was no ordinary season, but the final herald of the end. Odin, with his wisdom, spoke less and listened more, as though hearing the distant footsteps of fate. Thor tightened his grip on Mjolnir, restless for the battles he knew must come. Frigg mourned still for Balder, her grief heavier in the silence of snow. Even the natural world showed signs of the coming doom. Wolves prowled bolder, their eyes glinting in the dim light, their howls carrying farther than before. The seas groaned with shifting ice, and deep within, Jormungandr stirred restlessly, his coils pressing against the ocean floor. Mountains cracked with the pressure of frost, and avalanches thundered down their sides, as if the earth itself groaned beneath the weight of winter. The Fimbulwinter was not only a trial of the body, but a deep reminder of impermanence. For the Norse, who lived close to the land, who felt each season with raw immediacy, winter was always a force both feared and respected. Yet here, in its most extreme, it became a symbol of the inevitable, that warmth cannot last forever, that light must yield to dark, that even the bonds of kinship may fail when the world itself falters. As you rest, imagine the quiet of this endless winter. The snow falls softly, endlessly, covering everything in silence. The wind hums a low, steady song, carrying through the bare trees. Fires glow dim in lonely halls, their warmth barely touching the cold. The world seems hushed, waiting, holding its breath. There is a stillness to it, a stillness that is both peaceful and foreboding, as though time itself has slowed to a crawl beneath the weight of snow. In these tales, the Fimbulwinter is not merely a background to the story, but a character in its own right, a force that shapes the end as surely as any god or giant. It strips away the illusions of safety, revealing what lies beneath. And it reminds us, even now, of the fragility of life and the resilience needed to endure when all seems lost. Yet even the longest winter cannot last forever. In the heart of Fimbulwinter, the seeds of change are sown. For when men have fought and fallen, when the snow has buried the world, when even hope seems frozen, the next stage of Ragnarok begins. The chains that bind Fenrir will shatter. The serpent will rise from the seas. The sky will split, and the fire giants will march. The great winter is the pause before the storm, the silence before the roar, the deep breath before the cry of doom. The long silence of Fimbulwinter could not hold forever. Though the world lay buried in snow, though the wind seemed endless and the stars cold, deep forces stirred beneath the ice, the sea, and the soil. The prophecies had spoken clearly. When the bonds of kinship among men had broken, the bonds of the cosmos would follow. It began with Fenrir. The great wolf, son of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, had long been bound in Asgard. The gods had feared him from the day of his birth, for he grew with unnatural speed and strength, his eyes blazing with hunger, his jaws wide enough to swallow the sky. 3 times the Aesir had tried to bind him, and twice he broke free, snapping chains as if they were threads of flax. At last, they had tricked him into wearing the magical fetter Gleipnir, a ribbon soft to the touch but strong with dwarven sorcery. He had strained and pulled, yet could not break it, and so he had remained chained, waiting, his rage growing with each passing year. But nothing forged can last forever. As the last snow of Fimbulwinter fell, the bonds of Gleipnir began to fray. First a shiver, then a crack, then the sound of snapping threads as the fetter unraveled. With a roar that shook the heavens, Fenrir broke free at last. His howl rolled across the worlds like thunder, echoing through Asgard, Midgard, and beyond. The ground trembled beneath his paws, and the air seemed to burn with the heat of his breath. His jaws gaped wide, so wide that they brushed the earth and the sky, as though he might devour both. At the same time, the sea began to heave. Beneath its dark waters, Jormungandr stirred. The Midgard serpent, vast beyond measure, had lain coiled around the world, its body forming an endless circle. But now, with the final winter spent, it shifted restlessly, twisting in the depths, its scales grinding against rock and seabed. Waves rose higher, crashing upon frozen shores. Ships were shattered like twigs, and the ice cracked under the force of the serpent's stirring. Then, with a hiss and a roar, Jormungandr broke the surface. His coils unwrapped, his head rose above the waves, and venom dripped from his fangs, spreading poison into the sea and the air alike. The oceans boiled with his fury, and storms lashed the coasts. The release of Fenrir and Jormungandr was no accident. These were the signs the seers had long foretold. When the wolf was free, and the serpent uncoiled, Ragnarok would be at hand. The order the gods had fought to preserve for so long was unraveling, thread by thread, bond by bond. The breaking of these chains was more than the release of beasts. It was the breaking of trust between gods and the creatures they had sought to contain. The Aesir had bound Fenrir out of fear, had cast Jormungandr into the sea to keep him away, and had banished Hel to her realm of the dead. But now, those choices returned in fury. Every bond the gods had forged to delay fate was snapping, and every banished child of Loki was rising to claim their part in the end. In Asgard, the gods felt the shift. The ground trembled beneath the golden halls, and the sky darkened with storm. Odin, wise All-Father, looked to the horizon and knew what had come. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, brought back visions of the wolf on the prowl, and the serpent rising from the sea. He gathered the gods, and though their hearts were strong, each felt the weight of doom pressing close. Thor's hand tightened upon Mjolnir, his fury rising as he thought of Jormungandr, his destined foe. Tyr, who had lost his hand to Fenrir, stood grim, knowing he must face the hound Garmr at the gates of hell. Freyr, bright god of fertility, felt his strength falter, for he no longer held his magical sword. It had been traded away long ago, leaving him unarmed in the final battle. The world itself mirrored the breaking of bonds. Mountains shook and split, rivers boiled, and forests toppled. The sky cracked with lightning, and thunder rolled endlessly. The seas swallowed the land, and the land buckled beneath the strain. It was as if the universe itself had been held together by those fetters, and now, loosed, it fell apart. Yet within this chaos, there was a strange stillness for those who listened closely. The sagas tell us that Ragnarok unfolds not as a sudden storm, but as a series of awakenings. First the winter, then the wolf, then the serpent, each step a measured beat in the drum of fate. And so, as the bonds broke, the world did not end at once, but prepared itself for the next act. As you rest, imagine the slow release of tension, the snapping of chains after years of strain. Hear the deep roar of Fenrir, echoing like distant thunder, and the hiss of Jormungandr as he breaches the waves. Feel the trembling of the ground, the pull of the tide, the slow collapse of order. It is not a sudden terror, but a steady unraveling, like a great tapestry coming apart, thread by thread. The Norse believed that such endings were not failures, but fulfillments of destiny. For just as all men must die, so too must the gods, and even the world itself. The breaking of the bonds was not a crime against order, but the natural course of fate. What has been bound must one day be loosed, and what has been hidden must one day be revealed. Now, with the wolf unchained and the serpent uncoiled, the path was open for the final clash. Soon the fire giants would march, and the sky itself would burn. But in this moment, in the stillness after the snapping of bonds, the world paused, trembling on the edge of the end. From the far south, beyond the realms of men and gods, lies Muspelheim, the land of fire, older than the earth itself, older even than the first shaping of the 9 worlds. It was from Muspelheim's sparks that life and form were first kindled in the great void of Ginnungagap. And it was from Muspelheim that the last and greatest destroyer would come. His name was Surt, the Black One, the giant of flame, whose sword shone brighter than the sun. For ages, Surtur had waited at the borders of his realm, his fire kept apart from the ordered worlds by the strength of the gods. But now, as the wolf was loosed and the serpent rose, his time had come. The prophecies told that when Surtur marched, no force could withstand him. His sword would set the heavens aflame. His presence would turn the world to ash, and the bridge between realms, Bifrost itself, would shatter beneath his host. Imagine the shift, from the deep stillness of snow to the sudden roar of flame. The endless white of Fimbulwinter gave way to glowing red, as if the horizon itself had caught fire. Smoke curled upward, black and heavy, dimming the weak light of the sun. The crackle of burning filled the air, and the smell of ash and soot spread across the worlds. The fire giants, Surtur's kin, marched with him, a vast host carrying torches and weapons that glowed like molten iron. Their steps shook the ground, their heat withered all in their path, and their laughter, if it could be called laughter, echoed like the roar of a blazing furnace. The gods watched with dread, for though Thor was mighty, though Odin was wise, none among the Aesir could stand against Surtur's fire alone. His sword was said to be greater than any weapon forged, glowing so bright that it blinded those who looked upon it. With it, he would bring down not just Asgard or Midgard, but the very heavens above. As Surtur advanced, the Rainbow Bridge, Bifrost, trembled beneath the tread of his army. Bifrost had long been the shining link between realms, a path of beauty and strength, arched across the sky. But it was never meant to bear the weight of fire and steel. The sagas say that as the giants crossed, Bifrost cracked and split, its colors fading, its arc collapsing into ruin. With its breaking, the last strong connection between the worlds was severed. The realms stood alone, surrounded by storm, sea, and fire. In Midgard, men looked to the skies and saw them aflame. Where once snow had fallen endlessly, now fire rained down, burning forests, fields, and homes. Ice melted into torrents, floods raged through valleys, and flames consumed what the waters did not. It was as though all the elements of the world, once balanced, now turned against each other, each bent on destruction. Surtur himself strode at the head of his host, vast and terrible. His hair and beard were like flame, his eyes like molten stone, his presence unbearable to those who drew near. Each swing of his sword lit the horizon, as though he carried a piece of the sun itself. The gods knew that he was their greatest doom, the one destined to meet them in the last clash and to bring fire that no water could quench. And yet, even here, the calm wisdom of the old stories reminds us. Destruction is not only an end, but a transformation. The fire that burns also clears, the flame that consumes also renews. In the Norse vision, Surtur's fire was not only a terror but a necessary step, the closing of one world so that another might rise. As you rest, imagine the slow march of fire across a frozen land. The snow melts, steam rising in soft clouds. The crackling of flames mingles with the sighing of the wind. The horizon glows with dull red, not sudden or violent, but steady, inevitable, like embers spreading through a forest floor. The world does not end all at once. It changes, shifting from ice to flame, from stillness to motion, from silence to roar. In Asgard, the gods prepared. Heimdall, the watchman of the bridge, sounded his great horn, Jularhorn, for the last time. Its deep note echoed across the 9 worlds, calling the gods to arms, calling warriors from Valhalla, calling even the dead to rise for the final battle. The sound rolled like thunder, vast and solemn, carrying a sense of finality, yet also of readiness. This was the moment they had long awaited, the moment for which Odin had gathered heroes, for which Thor had fought countless foes, for which Tyr, Freyr, and all the Aesir had endured. The march of Surtur and his host was unstoppable, but the gods would not meet them with despair. They would meet them with courage, knowing that though fate was fixed, the honor of standing against it was theirs to claim. And so, with the fire of Muspelheim spilling into the ordered worlds, with the bridge broken and the sky aflame, the stage was set for the clash that would decide the end of all things. The wolf waited, the serpent coiled, the giants advanced, and the gods gathered. The fire was no longer at the edge of the world. It was here, upon the doorstep of Asgard itself. At the edge of Asgard stands Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, the guardian of Bifrost. Born of 9 mothers, gifted with eyes that see 100 leagues and ears that hear the grass grow, Heimdall was set to his post at the beginning of time. His duty was vigilance, to watch the worlds, to hear the smallest sound, to guard the gods against danger. For ages, he had stood silent, his gaze never wavering, his great horn, Jularhorn, resting at his side. The sagas say that when Jularhorn sounded, all would hear it, from the heights of Asgard to the depths of hell. Its note would signal the last day, the final gathering, the start of Ragnarok. Now, as the fire giants marched from Muspelheim, as Fenrir roamed free, as Jormungandr lashed the seas, Heimdall lifted the horn to his lips. He drew in a breath deeper than mountains, steadier than the tides, and blew. The sound was unlike any other, not loud in the way of thunder, not sharp in the way of steel, but vast, deep, and endless. It was a note that filled the air, that seemed to vibrate in the bones of the earth itself. Across Midgard, men heard it and felt their hearts tremble. In Jotunheim, giants turned their heads toward the sound. In Niflheim, Hel herself paused in her still halls. And in Asgard, every god raised their head, for they knew what it meant. The last battle had come. The warriors of Valhalla stirred. For centuries they had feasted and fought within Odin's hall, training daily, falling and rising again with each dusk, their strength sharpened for this moment. Now they rose as one, their armor gleaming, their spears and swords ready. Valkyries mounted their steeds, their cloaks flashing like the northern lights, their voices calm as they prepared to lead the chosen to the field of Vigrid. The gods, too, prepared. Odin donned his war helm, golden and bright. He mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, faster than any horse that had ever been. His spear Gungnir was in his hand, its point sure, its aim never failing. He did not ride with hope of victory, for he knew his fate, to fall before Fenrir. Yet he rode with purpose, with the dignity of one who faces doom unflinching. Thor readied himself, his hammer Mjolnir heavy in his grip, lightning flickering about its head. He knew his own fate as well, that he and the serpent would slay one another. Still, his spirit was fierce, his will unbroken. He would meet his enemy with all the might of thunder. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, prepared to face Garmr, the hound of hell, whose chains would also break in this hour. Though he had long been marked by loss, Tyr was steady, his courage quiet but resolute. Freyr, god of fertility and peace, stood ready too, though he had given away his sword long ago in a bargain of love. He knew he was doomed without it, yet he would not shrink from battle. With antler in hand, he would face Surtr, though the fire giant's blade blazed brighter than the sun. Frigg and Freya gathered with the Valkyries, their roles to guide and mourn, to strengthen and to comfort. The goddesses did not falter, though their hearts ached with what they foresaw. As Gjallarhorn's note continued, it stretched across the 9 worlds. The field of Vigrid spread wide, a plain so vast that it could hold all who came, gods, giants, men, beasts, and the dead. There, the armies gathered. The ground shook with the tread of giants, the wings of Valkyries, the hooves of steeds, and the march of warriors. The sagas say that even the dead rose for this day, not only the honored fallen of Valhalla, but also the legions of hell, led by Loki and his daughter. From the underworld they came, silent and cold, filling the plain with their ranks. Ships of the dead, built from the nails of the unburied, carried them across dark waters. Their sails were black, their oars steady, their arrival inevitable. And so, under the red glow of Surtr's fire and the black storm raised by Jormungandr, under the long echo of Gjallarhorn, all the forces of creation and destruction gathered at Vigrid. There was no turning back. As you lie in stillness, imagine that deep note of the horn stretching endlessly through the air. It is not harsh or jarring, but steady, resonant, like the sound of wind through a canyon or the hum of earth beneath your feet. It calls not to fear, but to readiness, to acceptance. The gods do not fight with illusions of triumph, but with clarity, knowing their fates and embracing them nonetheless. The Norse saw in this moment not despair, but a kind of peace. To know what must be faced, to rise and face it without hesitation. This was courage at its purest. The sound of Gjallarhorn was not only a summons to war, but a reminder that endings, too, have their place in the order of things. When the horn's note finally faded, silence hung for a breath, a long pause before the first clash. All was ready. Odin at the front, Thor by his side, the armies behind them, and across the field, the hosts of giants, beasts, and the dead. The plain of Vigrid stretched vast and waiting, as if the whole cosmos leaned in to watch. Ragnarok had begun in earnest. The plain of Vigrid stretched wide, vast enough to hold every army, every god, every beast, and every giant who came to fight. It was said to span 100 leagues in each direction, a field where the fate of all 9 worlds would be decided. Above it, the sky glowed red with fire and black with storm. The sea roared as the serpent writhed, and the ground trembled beneath the tread of armies. The gods stood ready, their armor gleaming faintly in the dim light. Odin rode at their head on Sleipnir, his spear Gungnir steady in his hand, his single eye fixed on the enemy. At his side stood Thor, tall and broad, lightning flickering about his hammer Mjolnir. Behind them came Tyr, Freyr, Heimdall, and the hosts of Valhalla, warriors shining in their thousands, led by Valkyries whose cloaks shimmered like dawnlight. Across the plain, the forces of chaos assembled. Fenrir, the great wolf, loomed larger than any mountain, his jaws open wide enough to swallow the sun. Beside him, Jormungandr's coils encircled the field, his venom dripping into rivers of poison. Loki stood tall, no longer bound, his eyes alight with malice, his army of the dead gathered in endless ranks, pale and silent. Hel herself guided them, her face half fair, half corpse-like, her gaze calm as she watched the fate of all things unfold. And at the rear, the fire giants marched with Surtr at their head, his flaming sword raised high, brighter than the heavens themselves. The silence that fell before the first clash was deep, heavy, and endless. It was the hush before thunder, the stillness before storm. Then, with a sound like the cracking of the world, the battle began. Odin spurred Sleipnir forward, charging toward Fenrir. His spear shone as he cast it, unerring as always, but the wolf's hide was thick, and his hunger unending. Fenrir lunged, jaws wide, and Odin vanished into his maw. The All-Father, wisest of gods, fell to the doom long foretold. But vengeance came swift. From the ranks of Odin's sons, Vidar stepped forward, silent and strong. He wore the thick shoe made of all the scraps of leather men had ever cut. With it, he pressed down upon Fenrir's jaw, holding it fast, and with his other hand, he drove his sword upward into the wolf's heart. Fenrir writhed, roared, and fell, broken, even as the memory of Odin faded from the field. Elsewhere, Thor met Jormungandr. Lightning flared, and thunder rolled as Mjolnir struck the serpent's skull. The serpent hissed, striking back, his venom spraying across the battlefield. Blow after blow shook the plain. The god of thunder and the world serpent locked in combat that shook sea and sky alike. At last, Thor struck the killing blow, shattering Jormungandr's head, and the serpent fell lifeless. But as Thor staggered back, he felt the venom already burning in his veins. He took 9 steps before collapsing, lifeless, beside his enemy. Tyr, the one-handed god, found himself before Garmr, the hound of hell. The two lunged at one another, silent but fierce. Tyr struck true, even with his single hand, but the hound's fangs tore into him. The battle ended with both lying still, each having slain the other. Freyr stepped forward to meet Surtr, the fire giant whose sword blazed like the sun. But Freyr had given away his weapon long ago, and though he fought bravely with an antler, his strength was no match. Surtr's blade cut him down, and the god of fertility fell, his light extinguished. Yet the giant, too, staggered, his fire dimmed for a moment, though it burned on. Heimdall, watchman of the gods, faced Loki, his old adversary. The trickster god fought with cunning, weaving through the chaos, his strikes quick and cruel. Heimdall was steady, unyielding, and the two clashed again and again. At last, each struck the other down. Loki fell, his laughter fading into silence, and Heimdall followed, his duty complete. Around them, the plain shook with the clash of armies. Valkyries guided the fallen warriors of Valhalla into battle, their voices calm even as blades struck. Giants roared, their feet breaking the earth, their fists like hammers. The dead fought without sound, their eyes blank, their numbers endless. Men fought beside gods, gods beside giants, until the plain was soaked in blood, ash, and venom. And then came Surtr, striding forward, his fire brighter than all. He raised his sword high, and with a single swing, flames leapt skyward. The heavens themselves caught fire, the stars vanished, and the sky turned to ash. The plain of Vigrid, the 9 worlds, the roots of Yggdrasil, all were consumed in fire. The sea boiled, the earth cracked, the air was smoke and flame. Yet the sagas remind us, even as all burned, there was no panic, only the steady fulfillment of what had long been known. Each god met their fate as foretold. Each battle unfolded as the seers had spoken. The Norse did not imagine a world ending in chaos without meaning, but in a pattern, a great weaving that unraveled as it was always meant to do. As you rest, picture the battle not as noise and frenzy, but as a slow tide rolling over the world. Each duel a wave, each fall a ripple, each flame a glow upon the horizon. The gods fought, the giants roared, the beasts raged, and then, at last, the fire spread over all, until nothing remained but smoke, silence, and the promise of renewal. The Battle of Vigrid was the end, but also the passage into what would follow. For even fire cannot consume forever, and even the greatest storm must pass. When the noise of battle fades from the imagination, what lingers are the still figures left upon the plain. The field of Vigrid, vast and broken, became not only a battleground but a resting place. And in that quiet, we can pause, as the Norse once did, to remember the passing of the gods, each meeting their destiny with the calmness of those who had long known what must be. First among them was Odin, the Allfather. His wisdom had guided the worlds, his eye had seen farther than any, and his voice had spoken countless truths. Yet even he could not outwit fate. When Fenrir's jaws closed about him, it was not with surprise, but with inevitability. The sagas say that Odin rode into that moment knowingly, spear raised, heart steady. He fell not in weakness, but in the fulfillment of the path he had walked since the beginning. His life had been one of sacrifice, of an eye given for wisdom, of his body upon the tree for knowledge of runes, of endless labor to hold chaos at bay. His death, too, was a sacrifice, the final offering to the cycle of the cosmos. Thor's fall came differently, in the heat of battle, hammer against serpent. The god of thunder had always been the fiercest protector, the one who stood between gods and giants, who roared his defiance into every storm. Against Jormungandr, he fought with all his strength, striking again and again until the serpent lay broken. Yet even victory brought no escape. The venom coursed through him, heavy and certain, and he staggered his 9 steps before falling. Thor's death was not defeat, but a mirror of his life. Fearless, relentless, his last act a triumph even as it cost him all. Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, met his end before the hound Garmr. His fate was quieter, less grand than Odin's or Thor's, yet no less meaningful. He who had placed his hand in Fenrir's jaws long ago, who had borne the mark of sacrifice upon his body, now fought and fell in silence. The sagas say that both he and the hound perished, neither rising again. Tyr's courage was always measured not in noise, but in endurance. In death, as in life, he was steady. Freyr's passing was sorrowful in its inevitability. Once a god of light, peace, and prosperity, he faced Surt, the fire giant, unarmed of the sword that should have been his. Long ago he had given it away for the sake of love, and now that choice sealed his doom. With only an antler in hand, he fought bravely, yet the fire sword struck him down. The image is one of tragedy, the bringer of fertility and life consumed by flame. Yet there is dignity, too, for he faced what came without turning away. Heimdall, the watchman, fell with Loki. Their duel was one of opposites, order against trickery, vigilance against chaos. Neither could outlast the other, and so they struck one another down. Heimdall's fall was the ending of his eternal watch, his horn already sounded, his duty complete. Loki's fall was the final act of the trickster, who had sown the seeds of chaos yet could not escape its harvest. Their deaths bound together, like 2 sides of the same coin. And what of Loki? The sagas describe him not as victorious, but as spent, his tricks exhausted, his malice carried as far as it could go. He fell as all must fall, undone not by cleverness but by inevitability. For all his cunning, he too was woven into the web of fate, and his thread ended on the field of Vigrid. One by one, the great figures of Asgard lay silent. Frigg's sorrow was complete, her husband and sons gone. Freya's tears fell, her Valkyries weary from guiding the countless dead. The warriors of Valhalla, who had trained and feasted for this day, now lay among those they had once fought. The plain was heavy with loss, yet also with a strange calm. The Norse saw these deaths not as failures, but as fulfillments. To them, courage was not found in avoiding death, but in facing it with steadiness. Each god had long known their fate. The prophecies had been spoken, the visions seen, and none had turned away. Odin rode knowing he would fall. Thor raised his hammer knowing he would not live beyond 9 steps. Freyr took the field without a sword, aware of what awaited him. Tyr, Heimdall, and even Loki stepped into their final moments with full knowledge. As you listen, let these endings feel less like violence and more like a solemn procession, each step guided, each fall graceful in its inevitability. The gods do not scream, do not rage. They meet their destinies as one meets the setting sun. The field of Vigrid becomes not only a place of battle, but a hall of remembrance, a place where endings are honored for what they are. The sagas remind us that nothing is eternal, not even gods. Strength fades, wisdom ends, fire consumes, and even thunder falls silent. Yet there is peace in this truth. For if endings are part of the order, then they are not to be feared. They are simply the turning of the page, the closing of one chapter so that another may be written. And so the gods passed, their names echoing through story, their deeds remembered not only in life but in death. Odin, the seeker of wisdom. Thor, the protector. Tyr, the just. Freyr, the giver of life. Heimdall, the watchful. Even Loki, the trickster, woven into the fabric of fate. Their stories did not end at Vigrid, for we carry them still, in memory, in myth, in quiet reflection. The field grew still, the flames spreading, the smoke rising. One by one, the voices of the gods were silenced, leaving only fire, ash, and the whisper of what was to come next. When the gods had fallen, when beasts and giants alike lay broken upon the plain of Vigrid, there came the last great act of ending. Surtr, the fire giant, raised his blazing sword high. Its light filled the sky, brighter than the sun, brighter than all stars, as though the heavens themselves had caught flame. And with one swing, he brought the fire forth. The flames leapt outward, spreading from the battlefield across the 9 worlds. First they consumed the plain itself, licking over the bodies of gods and giants, of men and beasts, until all was hidden beneath fire. Then they raced across mountains, forests, and fields, climbing Yggdrasil's roots, burning the very branches of the world tree. Even the heavens above could not escape. The stars flickered, dimmed, and vanished, leaving behind only smoke and shadow. The seas, too, were stirred into fury. Jormungandr, though slain, had released his venom into the waters, and as the fire raged, the ocean rose. Waves climbed higher and higher, boiling as they touched the flames, steam rising into the darkened sky. The earth split apart, cliffs falling into the sea, rivers vanishing in clouds of vapor. Where once there had been land, there was only water, surging and rolling, swallowing what remained. It was said that the sound of this ending was like nothing else. The roar of fire, the crash of waves, the cracking of stone. Yet for those who imagined it in the old tales, it was not noise, but a vast, steady hum, like the breathing of the cosmos itself. The Norse poets did not describe panic or frantic struggle, but inevitability. Fire and flood did not rage wildly, but moved with purpose, as though completing a long-awaited task. Yggdrasil, the world tree, trembled. Its roots shuddered, its branches cracked, its leaves fell into the flames. The great creatures who dwelled upon it, the eagle above, the dragon Nidhogg below, vanished into the burning. The tree that had once bound the worlds together now quivered on the edge of collapse. Yet even in this destruction, the sagas hint at endurance. For though Yggdrasil burned, though its bark split and its boughs fell, its essence was not erased. Fire could consume much, but the seed of life lingered still. Surtr's fire reached even to the realm of the dead. Hell's kingdom, half shadow and half light, was swallowed in flame, its halls crumbling, its silent hosts sinking beneath rising water. Muspelheim, land of fire, burned brighter still, feeding the destruction until it seemed the entire cosmos was nothing but smoke and flame. In the human world of Midgard, mountains cracked, forests blazed, and oceans claimed the land. The homes of men were gone, the fields washed away. Yet the Norse did not tell this with despair, but with calm acceptance. For they knew that Midgard, like Asgard, like all realms, was bound to the cycle. To end was simply to prepare for renewal. The image the poets leave us is simple: a world drowned, a sky on fire, an earth shattered. Nothing of the old remained. The sun was gone, the moon swallowed, the stars burned away. The 9 worlds that once stretched in splendor across the branches of Yggdrasil were dissolved, their shapes lost in flame and flood. And then, silence. For in the Norse imagination, destruction was not endless. Fire did not burn forever. Water did not rise without end. The great ending came to its height, and then it passed, leaving stillness in its wake. The sea settled, the flames dimmed, the ash drifted down like falling snow. What had been vast and full was now empty, quiet, waiting. It is a powerful image for sleep, the world not in frenzy, but in rest. Imagine fire fading into embers, waves softening into ripples, smoke lifting into the night. The ruin of all things becomes not a storm, but a hush, the kind of deep stillness that comes only after the loudest thunder has rolled away. The Norse told their listeners that after this flood and fire, a new world would rise. But in this moment, As the cosmos lies silent, there is only rest. The old has ended. The cycle has paused. All is quiet. As you drift deeper, you may picture the fire and flood not as terrors, but as gentle forces clearing the way. The flames sweep through like a warm breeze. The waters roll like a slow tide, washing away what no longer remains. It is the breath of the universe, exhaling, emptying itself, preparing for something more. The fire and the flood complete the unraveling. They leave nothing behind but stillness. And in that stillness, the seeds of what is to come rest quietly, unseen, waiting for their time to grow. From the silence after fire and flood, there came a stirring. The world that had been consumed was not gone forever. Out of the ashes, out of the waters, something new began to take shape. The sagas tell us that when the flames had cooled, when the waves had stilled, the earth rose again, green and fresh. Mountains lifted their heads from the sea, fields spread wide with grasses, and forests began to grow once more. The smoke cleared, and the sky opened, bright and clean as if it had been washed. This was not the same world as before. It was a world renewed, born from destruction, carrying the memory of what had ended, but also the promise of what would come. The Norse spoke of it as softer, calmer, more fertile. Where once there had been ruin, there was now growth. Where once there had been noise, now there was peace. From the sea, the land rose fertile and green. Rivers flowed again, clear and gentle. The air was sweet, and flowers bloomed where fire had passed. The earth, once cracked and broken, was whole once more. It was as though the cycle had turned its page, the cosmos writing a new chapter upon the same parchment where the old had faded. Upon this new earth, survivors appeared. Not all had perished in Ragnarok. 2 humans had hidden themselves away, sheltered from the fire and the flood in the roots of Yggdrasil. Their names were Lif and Lifthraser, life and the will to live. They had rested in the shelter of the tree as the world above burned and drowned. From them, humankind would rise again. Their children, and their children's children, would walk the green fields, breathe the clear air, and see the sun once more. And there was a new sun. For though the old sun had been swallowed by the wolf, her daughter remained, a child of light who now rose into the heavens to shine. Her glow was gentle, bright but not harsh, a symbol that even in loss, there is continuity. The day returned, warm and golden, as though nothing had ever burned. The gods, too, were not entirely gone. Some returned in this new age. Balder, the fair and gentle god, who had been slain long before Ragnarok, now rose from the realm of the dead. His presence was like morning itself, a light long awaited. With him came Hodr, his brother, once blinded and once burdened with guilt, now restored. Together they walked in the fresh fields, symbols of reconciliation and peace. Other sons of the fallen gods appeared as well. Vidar, who had avenged Odin, and Vali, who had endured the battle, remained. The sons of Thor, Modi, and Magni carried with them their father's hammer, Mjolnir, a relic of the old world and a promise of protection for the new. They did not fight with it now, for there were no enemies to strike. Instead, it was a symbol of strength preserved, a reminder that courage, too, had survived. The image is gentle. Gods walking in meadows, rivers flowing softly, humankind beginning anew, the sky bright and calm. Where once there had been roar and flame, now there was birdsong, whispering wind, and the laughter of children. The world was quiet, but not empty. It was renewed, refreshed, a garden after storm. The Norse saw this not as a denial of death, but as its balance. Everything ends, they believed, but endings are never final. From ash comes growth, from water comes life. The cycle of destruction is always paired with renewal. It is a truth as natural as night and day, as winter followed by spring. As you listen, picture this new dawn not as sudden, but as gradual, the slow lifting of mist from a field, the gradual warming of air at sunrise, the gentle spread of light across a horizon. The new world does not rush into being. It unfolds, quietly, like a dream. It is here that the story softens most of all. The noise of Ragnarok is far behind, and what remains is peace. A peace not fragile, but deep, rooted in the very earth itself. This is the gift of the cycle, that even after the fiercest storm, calm returns. Even after the darkest night, morning comes. The sagas leave us with this vision: a green earth beneath a new sun, humankind walking once more, God's return to guide them, and the memory of what was past held gently, not in grief, but in reverence. The world had ended, and yet it began again. As you drift deeper into rest, let this vision linger: wide meadows stretching under clear skies, rivers shining like glass, the sound of wind through trees. A world at peace, born anew. For just as the Norse believed, endings in your own life, too, may hold the seeds of beginnings. And like Lif and Lifthraser, like Baldur and Hodor, like the earth itself, you may find renewal waiting, quiet and steady, beyond every fire and flood.